Alfred Hitchcock was one of the most influential filmmakers of the 20th century. It can be seen through his combinations of music, camera work, and the fact that it conveyed the psychological within the films. As the United States moved through the 20th century, film became a major part of America's entertainment and popular culture. They would often be short film strips, newsreels, comedy reels, and full-length films that ranged from comedy to drama to cowboys. During Alfred Hitchcock's filmmaking career, the industry revolutionized partially because of his contributions. Born in 1899 and raised in England, the director got his start working in the news, submitting stories that became wildly popular. He then graduated to photography and cinema. His first few silent films throughout the 1920s were unsuccessful. However, when sound came on the scene, Hitchcock found success with the films The Man Who Knew Too Much in 1934 and 39 Steps in 1935. His success continued to grow as he came out with films such as Rear Window in 1954, Vertigo in 1958, North by Northwest in 1959, Psycho in 1960, and The Birds in 1963. He continued directing and creating until his death in 1980. During his half-a-century career, he revolutionized the industry by combining things that had never been combined before into art. He used music, camera, angles, and unexpected plot twists to shock audiences. He also added the psychological into his films in a way audiences had rarely ever seen before, and this has carried into this age of cinema. After Hitchcock's films kept appearing and gaining popularity, the use of music and artistic camera shots became more common within all genres of film, since it contributes to building the emotions of a scene and gives the audiences an inside view onto the story and lives of the characters. For example, in the movie Psycho, the use of shrieking violins is used to convey the drama and anxiety of the scene. The 45-second scene also utilized about 78 clips of footage to convey the image of a woman in a shower being stabbed to death without explicitly showing it to you. He also used perspective filming to give the audience a more in-depth view of what the character was seeing. Hitchcock explored combinations of these techniques in ways that have made his movies considered as true art. Many movies of the time focused more on dialogue, since talkies were still fairly new and gaining popularity. However, Hitchcock introduced a style that made films into visual masterpieces and brought modern-day films into a place that didn't just rely on dialogue to make the story interesting. The visuals used by Hitchcock, tied with the dialogue and use of music to convey the tone of the scene, have helped film and now television series become one of America's favorite sources of entertainment. Possibly one of Hitchcock's greatest contributions to cinema was the addition of a psychological factor to his films. He was able to incorporate psychology into many of his films and used it to create anxiety among the audience to truly terrify them with his movies. Hitchcock also introduced the concept of having a seemingly normal man actually turn out to be a psychopath or a sociopath as the quote-unquote villain in his horror films. Prior to that, horror movies had generally been about monsters such as Frankenstein, Dracula, and Godzilla. Hitchcock introduced the idea that killers and monsters can be human too. This concept helped to spawn slasher flicks and horror films with serial killers or people with some sort of psychological disorder as the villain. Hitchcock's addition of the psychological allowed audiences to connect with the movie they were seeing and influence the transition from classic to modern horror and thriller films. In each of his films, but particularly in Psycho, Hitchcock broke the audience's notion of how the plot was going to turn out. Before that picture, the most common plot for horror, mystery, and thriller films was that the hero or main character would always prevail. Psycho derailed that idea when Hitchcock decided to kill off the main character halfway through the movie. This same style has continued to be prevalent in horror, thriller, and slasher flicks. This kept audiences coming to showings and has to this day as plot twists get more and more complicated and intriguing. Hitchcock's influence is far-reaching, and his work has been referenced countless times. His filmmaking techniques have been used in every genre, and you can see direct references to his films in thrillers like Dressed to Kill, all the way to comedy and comedy television shows like Psych and often on The Simpsons. His contributions to the composition of film have changed cinema to fit the current time period. The combining of dramatic music and interesting new camera angles that accentuated the psychological twist Hitchcock put into his movies helped change the industry into something that would shock and awe the audiences and allow the industry to maintain its popularity and presence in American culture.